Hey guys, Astra here. Today I'm joined by someone else. This individual has done quite well with Imperial Agents over the last week or so. Recently, well, I'll let him introduce himself and let him talk about his story. So, would you like to introduce yourself for the channel's sake? What is it you've done? And who are
Sure.
you?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, my name's Matt, out of the US over here in the state of Michigan. And I've this summer I've actually been on somewhat of an odyssey with agents, culminating in my recent third place finish, going 5-1 at the Ragnarok GT out of about 74 people. And I'm very, very glad, very thankful for that event. And so a little background on that. I started playing Agents in June of this year, and I originally played in 4th edition, and I played Witch Hunters with Space Marine allies back then. So, one of the precursors to the modern day Agents. But when I got back into it, I was just playing my Space Marines, and then I realized, people said bad things about Agents, that it wasn't a real faction, that it didn't have support, and so I was kind of shied away from it. But then I realized, you know what? Let's go for it. And then I for ever since I kind of went to my first event, it just kind of happened that I was going to an event, either an RTT or a GT, just about every weekend from the end of June until this past weekend. There was, I think, one weekend where I took off, but there were just a bunch of, like I said, GTs and RTTs in the area. And each time I went, I could see my list evolving quite a bit. To the very first list I brought, it had a Corvus, it had a Deathwatch kill team with 4 shotguns in it, just because I thought they were cool, and I wanted to have a full shooting team. I had 2 assassins at that point. I even upped that to 3 in a later edition. I was running a bunch of the Voids men at arms, just dropping them down. And the first GT I went to, I went 1-5 or 1-4. It was 5 games, and not bad, but hey, we got a win, and a lot of those games were close. But when I first started, I was just thinking, oh, I'm gonna have fun. It's agents, right? That's what we're here to do, and I'm still in that mindset. But I just kind of, the more I played, the more I felt like, oh, there's actually something here. I think that can make a list viable, and that gets us to where we are today with this performance where we're actually able to rack up a few wins.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's also awesome to hear like how positive you are about the army and how much you seem to enjoy it. But, I mean, it comes across in the way that you talk about it. So,
Oh yeah, I love all the games. Have been a blast to play, win or lose.
But it's cool to hear the progression though. So I guess first off, congratulations on your tournament results, just in general. And I guess should we first go through what it is that you took to this most recent event?
Yeah, so this list is really focused on killing more so than a lot of the other agents variations that I'd either read about people playing or had played myself. And the centerpiece, of course, is the Canis Rex. And I had actually taken Canis to a couple events in the middle of the summer, and it was kind of mixed. I think in some cases I wasn't really playing him correctly, and others it just didn't seem to get the value. And then I went through a phase where I felt like knights being overrepresented meant everybody's coming prepared to kill knights. So, a good way to sort of undercut the meta would be to just not play any vehicles, easy for
Mm.
agents to do. And I ran a couple events like that. I actually won an RTT at my local store previously with a 3-0, using a list that was similar to this but without Canis in it. But then, and I had that list locked and loaded for the Ragnarok GT, and then at the 11th hour when lists were due, I just was thinking, you know what? I think Canis is the way, because it just adds that extra killing. And so the core of the list, obviously Canis is a really big asset, but then really the core are the 3 Deathwatch kill teams. So 2 of those kill teams are led by the Watchmasters. Obviously the advance and charge is enormous for those. And I max those out for melee with 4 shields. Again, the shields are really crucial for survivability. Those teams, obviously they have a great punch when they get in, and shooting isn't as much of an issue, at least on the early turns of the game, because you're usually just charging out of cover. or of course you have Displacer Field to give 4-ups to everybody. But I found when I didn't run full shields was that in close combat, if I didn't kill the target or if I got countercharged, that you get shredded by a lot of weapons in the game, and having those 4-up invuls to tank is just enough to keep the hammers alive for another round of combat, which is really what matters most with them. And so the third team I have is led by Artemis, partly because of points. I just didn't quite have enough points to fit a third Watchmaster in. But also, I do think Artemis has a lot of value in his stand up on death ability. I mean, that's intrinsically a powerful thing in all factions, and I think especially for us, where you know you're going to be getting into the mix, you're going to be fighting and dying on objectives, being able to have that sort of phase locked invincibility in a sense. Obviously, a 2-up, you know, I have failed that role a few times, but the ability to sort of know that you go into your enemies, if you can survive till the charge and the fight phase against your enemy, that they won't be able to remove that asset from the table if he stands back up, and then you'll have that you know, an action unit to use either to hold an objective, to kill something, because he is rather, you know, killy on his own, or just be a scoring unit is really helpful. And the lethal hits is all right. That's why in that third Deathwatch kill team, I dropped 2 of the shields to pick up the heavy bolters. Just seemed like with lethal hits, having a little bit of extra firepower was helpful there, and also the models. I just didn't actually want to convert more models to have shields, so there was a little bit of laziness in that as well. And then of course I run the classic breachers with the rogue trader. I had taken that out at one point because I felt like, I don't know, it just seemed like it wasn't really doing enough, but then upon further review I realized actually, if nothing else, the ability to string out and block off the entire midboard of infiltrating if you get first deployment is very, very good against certain armies. Interestingly, it didn't actually come into play as much in this event, but I did have past events where I would get first deployment and then I would just prevent my opponent's entire infiltration plan, which of course then allows me to infiltrate exactly where I want, which is very helpful. And on top of that, they always seem to have just an annoying amount of survivability, and of course with Displacer Field and Smoke, it keeps your opponent guessing. It's great when they draw Cull the Horde, because then they have to kill that entire unit, and I found in more than one game where my opponent would draw Cull and then get baited into focusing on the Rogue Trader entourage and then not be able to clean them up, just because with the way you can cycle through 4-up invuls, multi-wounds versus single wounds, and just 14 models, makes it a hard unit to really kill. You know, adding on top of that the ability to Displacer Field the safety out of another shooting lane, that can make them almost impossible to kill sometimes. And they do have a non-negligible amount of firepower, especially when you boost them with close quarters barrage, and they can take down, you know, light to medium units. And I was charging them in. I think half the games I ended up charging them in places just to tie things up and get the assassin and the rogue trader swinging with their power weapons. I think so. You know, then the next really core asset of the list are the subductor squads. In my opinion, it's really one of the most, if not the most, points efficient unit in the faction. You know, maybe not that it necessarily does everything, but just that survivability at 85 points, 11 models, all those 4-up saves and the 3-up base, they can survive a lot of activations that are anything that's not really geared towards clearing hordes, and even those that are, because they bounce off those 3-up saves.
Oh yeah.
They're just very good presence on the board. The Nuncio Aquila ability, I never really benefited from that. I don't think I used it. I try and use it. It's a kind of a cheeky little move, but the fact that it doesn't have any modifiers on it means that more often than not, your opponent's passing those battle shocks. But it is a good sort of way to play to your outs in the late game sometimes. The rhinos were the other factor. I have 2 rhinos in the list, and I'd gone back and forth on rhinos. I think that they feel like they don't do enough, mainly in comparison to other army transports. So like even a Chaos Rhino has twice the firepower at least, you know, on top of all the other normal Rhino things. You know, don't even look at a Tau Devilfish and compare on points what they can do versus what we can do. But, you know, part of this list is it's working with what you have. And the key of the rhinos is the staging of the Deathwatch kill teams. So in my list, generally one Deathwatch kill team infiltrates and the other two go in the rhinos. And the rhinos stay hidden turn one, and then usually turn two, they're blitzing up the map and getting into that next piece of cover so that the kill teams can unload and strike their targets on turn two or three, depending on if you went first or second. And the thing is, I thought for a while about, oh, well, what if I just advance the kill team? You can move maybe 9, 10, 12 inches if you're lucky, but you're not always lucky. It's not reliable. And the other key is that the Rhino is easier to hide than 11 models on 32 millimeter bases. So if nothing else, it's just an easier deployment, an easier thing to keep hidden. And then, of course, you have that 3-inch extra get out move on that charge turn, which is big. I actually got off a couple turn one charges because of just getting them 3 inches out, 6 inches, roll in advance, roll your charge, boom. You cover 20 inches easily doing that. And then the last part about the Rhino is they are a good utility piece in the mid to late game. So the thing about them is a lot of times they're not that hard to kill, but usually in order to kill them, your opponent's going to have to overcommit because light infantry, light weapons aren't going to clear it out, and then the heavier weapons oftentimes have better targets, namely Canis Rex and even the Deathwatch teams. So a lot of times the rhinos get overlooked as sort of a target to bring down, and then you still have this 12-inch movement, semi-durable, move blocking, point scoring, tank shocking utility piece that just sits around. So I was actually very happy with how the rhinos turned out, and not least of which how heroically one of them survived in my game against the Eldar. That anybody who saw on stream, it was kind of an amazing display where the rhino just kept making 5-ups and 6-up saves like it was, the game depended on it, which it maybe did at that point. And so last but not least, we've got two more characters. There's the Navigator, who sits on the home and blocks that out, and I think that's pretty self-explanatory with the 12-inch denial. And then the Calidus Assassin, which I know a lot of people run that. That's probably the most taken ally as well, and for good reason. I can't understate how good the Calidus is to have in just for scoring, utility, all these sort of items there. So that's something even when I was playing Space Marines, I don't think I ever ran a list that didn't have the Calidus. That's kind of my number one ad every time I run up an Imperium list. All right, number one, Calidus. Let's move on. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the list. Do you have any specific questions about the units or any other thoughts on this?
I mean, I think a lot of this is mostly self-explanatory. I think the most unusual thing from your list is probably the Deathwatch veterans. So I guess how have you found those in comparison to what more standard lists people have been running tend to do?
I think that in terms of just raw killing power, it's really the top piece in the faction armory, and they are a bit expensive, especially because I put characters in all of them, but it kind of gives you the ability to take down anything in the game, up to and including big knights. Granted, a Deathwatch team on its own isn't usually going to one-shot something like a knight, but it has happened. If you catch them on an objective, you mark them as your eliminated at all costs, you run in violent acquisition, and you can spike a few sixes and punch through a lot of damage. But even just against any elite infantry, they really can clear that out. They can take down some monsters and light vehicles too. And then they are they're not super durable. They are still just Marines, but with those shields, I find that they can at least survive one heavy activation, a type of unit that's really a Marine killer. If they fire into the Deathwatch, oftentimes they might peel off 4, 5, 6 Marines, but as long as that Watchmaster and 3 or 4 hammers are still alive, that's really the bulk of the firepower. So you can kind of tank one turn of heavy hitting for them and still keep them going. And really, the advance and charge is so strong on them that they're they're either hiding behind a wall waiting to charge, or they're in combat. You never really have to gamble on a charge. You really ensure that they get their value that way. And Another thing too, not to be understated, is the full rerolls against Xenos. I think I only played two Xenos players. I went up against Tyranids and Eldar, but it feels really good when you know that almost half the points in your army are gonna just be full rerolling hits.
Oh yeah, and potentially +1 to hit as well, right?
Right, yeah, on top of that.
Okay, well I guess bouncing off that, what were your matchups this event, like round by round?
Yeah, so round one, which was actually streamed on the Patreon stream of Tabletop Live, but you have to be I think a member to access that. But that was against Space Wolves, and I never played against Space Wolves before, but I know Marines. I kind of knew that they were melee heavy, and it was it was an interesting game where my opponent on turn one did the Logan Grimnar turn one deep strike and put a 10-man Terminator brick in my back line, and these are all 4 wound, -1 to wound. You know the works, right? Like just kind of impossible to kill. But I think he thought they might be more tanky than. I mean, they are tanky, but I shot them with Canis, and then I ran in a Deathwatch team, and I killed 7 or 8 of them just from that. And of course, his hit back in combat, he did kill like half the Death Watch because even just a few Terminators in the character were really strong. But I think that commitment there from him really allowed me to take over the rest of the board. And as far as anti-tank, he had one Gladiator Lancer, which I was able to get into combat with another Deathwatch team. Granted, it didn't actually die until turn 4, but it wasn't able to kill Canis, and then I parked Canis on the middle objective and just kind of took over the game from there. Still a very close game, but in the end, pulled out that win by maybe 10 or 15 points. The next matchup was against the Subterranean Assault Tyranids, and that one, it had me worried because I also had never gone into that specific detachment. I knew that they had the tunneling shenanigans and, a lot of this 6-inch charge stuff, but I was just very aggressive in that matchup. Again, I staged on one side of the board where I had the Rogue Trader entourage lined up with the Death Watch behind them. And really quick, I do want to touch on that as sort of a tactic I've used a lot. I mean, I think most veteran players understand how this works, but for people who might not be as familiar, if you're going against a melee focused army, things like the Subductors and the Rogue Trader entourage are great for making that screening wall, so you can just stick. I basically, let's say Subductors is more often the one I'm using. I see the enemy's melee threat, and I know that they want to charge me. I want to charge them. I'll stick my Death Watch in charge range so that if I have first turn, I'm going to be charging them. And then I just wall off with the Subductors in front of them so that if the enemy's going first, they have to kill all the Subductors in shooting if they want to get through and charge. Not necessarily all, but if you line them up base to base, then you can pull in between, and so you can basically lose up to 5 models without losing any of the actual distance of your wall. Anyway, if you're in a position where you don't think they have enough shooting to clear that, that basically means that you're immune to getting charged, or at the very least, they'd have to roll a very high charge roll to get around. So I did that in a corner against a couple of his monsters, and then just to make sure I would be safe, and then I got first turn, so I charged him turn 1. I actually didn't do nearly as much damage. I think part of it was a mistake on my part. I double charged 2 different monsters, and then kind of did like 2/3 damage to both of them instead of just focusing one and killing it. I didn't roll quite as well. Again, that was with a Deathwatch Hammer squad, and so I kind of had 2 hammers going into each, where I should have just committed all the hammers to one of them. But again, that game, I had Canis doing a lot of work once again, where I kind of walked Canis up the middle. I had a shield of Subductors wrapped around him to keep him from getting charged, because I knew charging was really the only way that Tyranids were going to kill him. He did have I believe they're the Zoanthropes that have las cannons, and he brought those in on Deep Strike. He had 1 round of shooting on Canis, and that was sort of a pivotal activation where I think he was shooting basically 6 las cannons at Canis.
Yeah.
So, not necessarily expected to kill it, but he also popped sustain on them with a strat. So I was worried. Like, there was very much potential to kill Canis there. He ended up doing about 12 or 14 damage. Actually, I think he did 15, and then there was some because I remember Canis actually when he finally got to charge, he was bracketed and was being -1 to hit. But the very next turn, I was able to charge those with Deathwatch, and Deathwatch just tear through them. It's 3 damage hammers against 3 wound models. Need I say more?
Oh
But
yeah.
another interesting thing about that game was the rhinos were really helpful, and I actually played very aggressively. Where because I knew he didn't have a whole lot of anti-tank shooting, I just drove the rhinos right up into the midboard alongside Canis, left the kill teams in them, and then his only way to kill the rhinos was to charge them, and he charged them with I think Raveners, and they could have maybe killed it if he got lucky, but they did it about half damage. And then the next turn, there was enough space to just get the kill team out on the other side, and then move into his zone. So that game actually, by the end of it, I think we kind of started talking it out around turn 4 because I actually had come close to tabling him just through sheer volume of Deathwatch hammers and Canis Rex, shooting and Freedom Hand swinging. But it was at the very beginning. It was definitely a close game, and I was worried about the trickery there.
Oh yeah.
Um,
I mean that attachment's a really strange one. I think I played against it once, and my experience tends to be that like it really wants to be really aggressive, and if it fails, it sort of starts to fall apart. So
Right. Yeah, I very much got that impression that I was able to kind of put that counter aggression on, and he wasn't able to really recover from that.
yeah, I guess for other Tyranid lists, I'm used to seeing like one or two of the Tyranno effects, the D6+6 gun. I feel like Canis is probably a lot more scared of that versus this, unless he can't
Yeah,
be charged.
that's right. Yeah, and he did not have one of those again, so I didn't have to watch out for that. But another thing with Canis too is that you have his one reroll, and so for a gun like that, if they get the hit, I have the similar thing with the Lancer. That one big hit. If you have a 5-up invul and you have a reroll locked into it, your odds of getting that save are actually above 50%. Now, you don't want to rely on that, and of course, if it kind of falls apart as soon as you're getting hit by multiple things. But I did have a couple of those games where I was able to reroll into a save against a 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever D6 high damage weapon, which is always great when you can pull that off.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So that was what, round 2?
Yeah, that was round 2. So round 3 was against the Eldar Seer Council. That one was on stream. Again, that was a game, kind of started out a little close. We're dancing around each other. The key there was that he had put his Howling Banshees with Jane Czar on an objective that he was able to tow in through the wall. I think relying on his fight first so that I couldn't really charge him profitably. But I guess what he didn't account for was that I would tank shock him. And I do remember he asked me, do I have, impact mortals? And I said, well, no, but I mean, tank shock, Um, and I think he was thinking Canis would be the one doing that, but it ended up being the Rhino. I only killed a couple, but the key there was that it got that Rhino, right up in their face, engaged them. So that was kind of step one. And then the biggest thing was that he had his fire dragons waiting, ready to go in the Wave Serpent, but he didn't really have the move to make it happen. So he kind of held it back, and I was holding Canis back, and then I was able to get a charge with my Death Watch off onto his Wave Serpent before he had used the Wave Serpent to attack Canis, and that was really critical. If he had been able to get that activation of the Fire Dragons into Canis, potentially killed him, a whole different game. But once I got the Death Watch on top of the Wave Serpent, that took that whole thing out of the game, and then Canis just run amok on the board pretty much unopposed, and that that really sealed that game. Then after that, I was up against. Oh yes, that was Custodes, which again, that was the first time I'd ever
Ooh.
gone against Custodes. I'll know, it's funny because people at the event, one of the things they're saying is, oh, I guess like nobody's ever played against agents, so you have that as an advantage. And I'm like, yeah, that's fair, but I also haven't played against half these armies either. I've only been in 10th edition. I've only been playing since the start of the year. It's like this was the first time I'd ever played against Custodes, either casually or otherwise. Granted, I know what they do. I've seen them on stream. It's not like I have no idea about the army. But that was a fun game too because at that point we're both 3-0, and there was they had a faction award, but they were grouped under just there wasn't quite enough people for every faction to get best in faction, but there was the grouping awards, which was, and our grouping was Custodes, Astra Militarum, and Agents. So at that point, all the guard players were 2 losses or more. The other Custodes player was down there too. So this game was already a big game in a way because the winner of this would effectively be guaranteed to get our best in faction prize. So there was that on the line already. Even though we were only at 3 wins, and that game was the closest game by far of the wins I had because I did get off a couple turn one charges with he put his so he had a very melee focused list of Custodes, and he kind of wanted me to charge him, and I warned him. I said, hey, these hammers gonna hit hard, but he's like, I got 4 wounds, 4 up, feel no pains, like, bring it on. And I was like, all right, well, I'm not gonna not charge. Like, there's only one outcome with Death Watch. We're not gonna run around trying to shoot you. We're gonna charge you. And I went first. I had 2 turn 1 charges. They did kind of bounce. I think I rolled a little, underwhelming, and then he had just, again, he popped 4 up, feel no pains on these guys. I had 2 Death Watch charge, 2 separate Custody squads, and I didn't kill either of them. But I did do enough damage to weaken them and force him to do a fallback on 1. And I was able to sort of springboard from there, where I had the survivors of that Death Watch. Again, you have the 11 models. They run in, they did their damage, they didn't finish the job. A couple Custodes kills 5 Marines at least, and so I did take some losses. But the remnants of that squad was then able to hit the Sisters of Silence he had on his objective. And we weren't playing linchpin, so it wasn't critical, but it was still an objective to have. And I think I did prevent him from defending Stronghold as well that turn. And the big note of that game was that I charged my Canis into another one of his Custodes squads, and it got bricked. I tank shocked on the way in. I was really on the fence between sweep and strike profile, and I don't know if there's really a right answer because he had that 4 up, feel no pain. So without that, I was confident I would probably sweep. But then, with the 4 up, feel no pain, I'm thinking, all right, a strike kind of guarantees it. But then even then, I thought, hey, if he makes a few too many feel no pains, he could, or just makes 4 up invul saves. So I swept. I actually rolled a ton, but then he saved a lot, and I ended up killing 1 model with Canis. And so that was really underwhelming. And I didn't die on the clapback, but then he brought Terminators in who killed who killed Canis rather the following turn. So at that point, I was kind of thinking this isn't going so well. But fortunately, I had been denying him primary those first 2 turns. And even though he killed everything, by the end of the game, he had killed all of my units except for my Navigator that was sitting on the home and my Calidus that had dropped, back onto his home. So between those, I was able to win by maybe 5 or 6 points. Like I said, it was very close, and that was with my opponent getting challengers too. That I'll add. Challengers. That I think that was. Actually, that's a point I did want to bring up earlier, that one of the things I noticed in my other lists was that I would get ahead on score, which, as I think agents are good at doing early on, but then my opponents are pulling challenger cards turn, maybe 2 even, but certainly 3, 4, and 5, and they're usually getting those 3 points. And there were at least 3 games across these events, maybe even a few more, that I lost purely on the challenger card points. So that was another reason why I shifted more towards this killing focus, because I was really tired of getting, winning the early game, losing my units, and then losing on challenger card points. It's just very frustrating. So I thought, let's just kill them, and then even if they're drawing challengers, it's not going to be enough for them to win. And so that's kind of how this went.
Yeah, I think,
again, denying.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a trend I've seen recently in a lot of armies, actually, is that unless you're going to double down on the skew of having just a million dudes, a lot of people have decided to sort of move away from that because of how much it's giving up challenger cards.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that it was definitely a consideration in this list of, I think without challenger cards, like I said, I would have won a few more games, had some more success, and I think I would have been more comfortable with the just, deny primary early, get that lead, and then just kind of hold on, hang in there, score out your secondaries, and still win even though you've lost your whole army. But that just wasn't, really the case in a lot of the games. Yeah, we got to win on Custodes. Then the next day, it started off going into Knights, and I know Knights are mixed. I'd played against Knights with this list. I don't think it's a bad matchup, but I also think it really depends on the type of Knights. And there's
Mm.
some knights that I would have been happy to go against, but there were two knights listed at this event that I didn't want to play. One of them was triple, I think it's the Castigator or whatever has the double auto cannons. So he's got like 46 plus 12 shots. You know, that would just wreck anything in my list. So I really didn't want to go against that. But then the other Knights player was running double Lancer and I guess the sort of Imperium thing that has like 18 shots at 622. You know, just another Marine killer
Is
on
it
top of some
the
armigers.
is it the Atropos, the Forge World one, or is that the other one?
No, he wasn't running that one. It was this was the Castigator. Okay, I think in the one that has the autocannon is one of the Questoris variants, so that's not the Castigator. The one
Mm.
he had in this list was the Castigator. It has 18 shots at 622 that are twin linked, and I think he could give it sustain. You know, it's just like
Oh,
that
that's gonna kill
really chews
subductors.
through. Yeah, exactly. Like it's a kind of thing that can take down it can take down Deathwatch and it can take down Subductors efficiently, even with the 4-up invuls. And so it was really hard to deal with. I also got first turn, which sometimes I like, but in that matchup I really didn't like that because it forced me to kind of push out. And the other thing about his list, just with all those the 14-inch move Lancers, is there wasn't really, and the terrain layout also really was sort of suboptimal that I couldn't really hide, and I also couldn't really move block him well, which I don't try. I didn't really try and jail anybody. I don't really try that with this list. I just kind of like, killing and scoring. But against knights, I thought I might have to kind of switch to that strategy mode, but then there just wasn't really the opportunity to do so. I would have had to line up so many layers of models to block a 14-inch move that can move over that front line, like I would have to have made this sort of area denial, and it just wasn't really viable. And once again, there was sort of one hope where I thought that my Canis and a Deathwatch could kill his Canis. I charged his Canis with a Deathwatch on turn 1, and between my Canis shooting him and my Deathwatch charging him, I did like actually 6 damage. And I was like, okay, that's just unfortunate. There's a world in which I kill Canis, right, with a Deathwatch charge and my own Canis shooting him. Not necessarily saying that's supposed to happen, but at a very minimum, I was hoping to get him, low enough to follow up and kill him on the next turn.
Oh yeah,
But that it was
with like the sustained like Lance devs, there's like a world where it high rolls and it happens.
yeah, exactly. But it was a series of unfortunate events, and then I ended up losing. I still got points. I think I put up about 58 points in that game, and I did hold him. He didn't get 100. He stopped at 85, but I was tabled by the end of it, other than the Calidus. But then game 6, the most exciting game, because at that point I kind of knew, okay, I'm in contention to actually place here, because if I go 5-1, so my goal at this event was to just go 3-3. I just wanted to move up my BCP leaderboard standings with the faction, particularly in the Midwest. There was another member from the Discord, Coriander. They actually had gone to a GT recently and done decently well, and that put their out. That was out of the Midwest as well. So now I had a sort of a rival who was potentially threatening my number 1 spot in the Midwest, and so I felt like, all right, if we can get 3 wins here, that will boost me up. 4 wins would have been really fantastic, go positive. But I wasn't even really setting my sights on, going any better than that. Obviously, I knew from the beginning, oh yeah, it would be great to win an event or something like that. But I wasn't really thinking about that. And so going into day 3 at 4-0, I kind of was like, all right, I've already accomplished my mission, so like I can just throw these games and be good. But and that was in the Knights game, especially. Like I thought, like, all right, let's see if we can just pick off Canis. And then when that failed, I was kind of really demoralized, and then I just got shredded. But then game 6, I was thinking, all right, you know what, look, 5-1 would be wonderful. That would be really cool. I think I could definitely do it. I knew that it was going to be a strong opponent, which it was in AdMech, but there were just a series of key plays in that game that went my way, and really allowed me to win, I think. And honestly, that one, again, that was a streamed game, and as I was saying to some other people, that it was kind of looking grim for me off the bat. He pulled an angle that I didn't really think he had, but I just didn't really want to argue it, because I thought it's probably there, and that allowed him to shoot my infiltrating Deathwatch on turn 1, and he ripped like half the squad just from one activation there. and then I just was like, all right, well, that kind of really weakens that side of the board. But a few things that really were solved there is one, I got my turn one charge off on one of his tanks and killed that, which was great. I also was able to get my Rogue Trader entourage off of a reactive move to get forward and take his other natural expansion objective on turn one. But once again, the real hero of the game was Canis Rex, and he had a great turn where he was able to one-shot a tank with just the right roll from his big gun, and then through charging, he killed another tank. He killed Belisarius Call. He just kind of stood unopposed on the enemy's home, and then I had bottom of turn burning. So that one, through the power of Canis, we were able to take it away. And that was the event. It was really a great time. I had a blast playing in all those games, and it was just really really enjoyable to get the faction out there and kind of take this more aggressive approach with it, where I was killing stuff and just winning on board domination.
Oh yeah, I mean, I managed to catch that last game live on stream, and I remember opening the stream and being like, "Ooh, two of my favorite factions are playing against each other."
Oh yeah, that was great.
No, it looked like a really interesting match. I particularly remember Artemis just surviving randomly for like 2 or 3 turns, being tagged by a tank for some reason.
Yeah, Artemis again. It's just one of those. Artemis and the Rhinos, I think, are two of these units in the list that just seem to randomly overperform by sticking around. And sometimes, turn 3, 4, 5, you just need a unit to do an action, and that's what they do.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I have seen some Asians people like play Artemis on his own, unattached, just as a scoring unit before, so I'm not at all surprised by that. So I guess my next thought process for this would be like going into the event, or even just now after the event. What would you say like your worst or best matchups have been like with this particular list?
Yeah, so I didn't go up against Death Guard at all, and I'm very curious how that would go. I haven't played Death Guard since my very first event when I was running the sort of Corvus shotguns jank list. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad matchup. And of course, post nerf, it's probably more manageable. But I did have a feeling, as with most, that Death Guard would be very tricky. Like I said with Knights, I knew that Knights was kind of hit or miss based on the composition. And again, the Knights that have those big anti-infantry guns, which not all of them run, but those are very hard to deal with, because even if you can kill a couple of them, they just can eat squads each turn, which is really rough for this list. But beyond that, I think that one of the things I like about the list is it handles most things, because it can kill big hard targets. It can very easily kill elite infantry, which of course is always a requirement. And it's also not terrible in dealing with horde lists, because with the infiltrate and also the sort of anti-infiltration screening you can do with the breachers, you don't really get blocked in by a horde list. And then the Death Watch can, they can kill hordes almost as efficiently as they kill sort of medium-sized targets. The frag cannons with blast, the heavy flamers from that one squad, and then just getting into combat and rolling 30 attacks, it adds up pretty quick.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'd definitely be curious to see where it goes from here. I guess the next thing I would ask would be like, obviously the list is going to have to change because Canis has now just gone up in points because of the most
Yeah.
recent mini slate we've had. Is there anything you change knowing that, I suppose?
Yeah, it's interesting you ask that, because I've been thinking about this since that change dropped, and playing through my head what I'm going to do. And it's really, I think I've settled on the final answer, but I'm not completely satisfied with it, because I did feel like this list was really well tuned. It basically took all of the things it needs and nothing else. It's kind of spamming the good stuff: triple subductor, triple kill team. There's not a lot of variety. You have all the good one-ofs. The Navigator, the Breachers, the Calidus. I feel like all of those are great one-ofs. I wouldn't really want 2 Navigators, even though I've seen them played. I wouldn't want a second Rogue Trader, or even really a second Breacher Brick, because that one with that infiltrate and redeploy is really the biggest value. And then the Rhinos. But I think that what I'm going to try is to pull a Subductor squad, which I was really torn on, because as I said, Subductors are super efficient. But the thing I realize is that the one Subductor squad that doesn't get to infiltrate doesn't have nearly as much as an impact as the two infiltrating subductor squads. And there's an argument to be made to infiltrate three, but I really want to infiltrate at least one Deathwatch kill team to try and threaten that turn one charge, or just threaten an objective in no man's land, kind of put it on lockdown. So I think what I'm going to be doing is taking out one subductor squad and then replacing it with that 50-point chaff squad, so either Voidsmen at Arms or Inquisitorial Agents. On that side, I lean towards Inquisitorial Agents. I think they just have a lot more utility, especially if the Voidsmen aren't deep striking, then they kind of lose some of their value there. And that agent squad, the previous list I had run that sort of 6 model agent squad more as like a backfield screening. Between the navigator and those 6 models, you can screen pretty much every deployment zone. Crucible of Battle is a little tricky, but with some of your frontline stuff that's at the midboard, you can cover your whole zone with that. And then they actually, I do feel like, have a little bit of late game utility. They're very squishy, but there have been a couple occasions where I moved them up and either used the Tome Skull for a sort of anti-battle shock, second insane bravery basically, or actually hop them in a Rhino and then move the Rhino up and shoot that multi-melta plasma pistol at something. And again, because it's a vehicle, you can shoot the pistol and the non-pistol weapon profile from that Rhino firing deck. So it's not a lot, but it's something. So I think that's where we're going to land. I toyed with taking out a Rhino. I thought maybe I take out a Rhino and infiltrate 2 of the Deathwatch kill teams instead of 1. But most layouts just don't have a good enough hiding spot for that second Deathwatch kill team. And again, the Rhinos, have already praised them a lot, so I like those a lot. I also toyed with removing a Watchmaster from one of the squads and replacing it with a different leader, which the only options at that for the point, so I have to find 35 points, right? And so removing a Watchmaster and replacing it with a generic Inquisitor was one of the things I was thinking about. And I actually like the generic Inquisitor a lot. His offensive profile is very strong with that 2d6 Dev Wound Torrent on top of the combi that hits on 3s. So it's all around a solid model, but I think that the Watchmaster, both giving advance and charge, which again I think is really important, and fallback and charge to a lesser extent, but also the number of times a Watchmaster just lives because he's got a 2-up, 4-up, 5 wounds and just keeps causing havoc with his 6 attacks. Whereas an Inquisitor, once the Deathwatch is dead, the Inquisitor is going to fold. He's got a 4-up, 5-up. He's not sticking around for very long. So I think in the end that the play will be just go down one Subductor squad, and we'll see how that goes. But I think the conclusion though is definitely keeping Canis. I also did consider running a different knight, so the Errant is now 375. Basically, would be a 1-for-1 trade out with Canis, but I think that the Canis hitting on 2s with sustained 5s, it's basically twice as good as the other shooting in terms of hitting. And the fact that his melee is so much stronger, I just think Canis is the one. If you're going to run a knight, you want to run Canis.
I think it's also the free strat too, to be honest. Just getting free tanks out
you're right.
is very, very strong.
Yeah, that, and like I said, the free reroll on an invul save, like that. I mean, it's right. A third of the time, you're going to blank a shot that you're going to take. And over the course of the game, if you get shot 3 times, you're at least blanking 1 shot. That's got value right there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely interesting hearing your different thoughts on the different unit types. Like, I didn't think too much about the Inquisitorial Agents, but I guess that's because a lot of the lists I built have had the Deep Strike enhancement.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, for those 50 points, if you're deep striking, Voidsmen obviously are the way to go. But without deep strike, I do think that the agents just offer a little bit more, even if they're not as durable.
I think the difference is fairly negligible, to be fair, so that does make sense.
Yeah.
I guess
I would. I did want to give honorable mentions to Sanctifiers. That the previous iteration, I was running a Sanctifier squad. And I think people are obviously, have found that out. I know a lot of people swear by Sanctifiers and they run at least 2 or 3. I didn't run any this time, and the reason was I found that as good as the Sanctifiers can be, that they don't they don't hit obviously as hard. And they have no durability, which we know they have no durability. You have to play them carefully. But I just found that with the other units I'm trying to hide on the mid board, there wasn't really space for them to hide, and that was really the problem. That at some point you run out of real estate to hide things, and the sanctifiers are the one thing where if they get shot at, you're losing that. They're pretty much gone, or at least they're no longer combat effective. Another key there, right, is like the Death Watch. You can lose half the squad, and it still has almost all of its hitting power. But especially with the Sanctifiers, because you have to keep that medic alive. You're often, if you lose half that squad, you're losing just about half that firepower.
Oh yeah. I think the big thing with the Sanctifiers as well is like I think a lot of people I've talked to have wished they could go in the other transport. What's it called? The Chimera.
Oh yeah,
the
that would
amount of
be great.
flamers you'd have on that thing if you could put them in there would be ludicrous.
Yeah.
But no, that's really cool. I suppose the last thing as far as list building goes I would want to ask is, are you worried at all about the potential new kill team boss coming out and changing how the veterans kit actually functions?
I've just been following the chats on that and the rumors. I am worried because if the kill team changes from what it is now, I don't think it would get better. Like 4 hammers is great. That's really why they were good. If these kill teams could only hold 2 hammers, we would be having a completely different conversation about list building. I don't think I would have any of them if there were only 2 hammers. Maybe 1, I guess, if if they had good guns. But I am optimistic on 2 fronts. One, I'm hoping they just leave more options. I know that GW isn't necessarily known for giving us the options we want, but I feel like there's a world in which they leave that, or at the very least, a world in which they don't touch ours because we get so overlooked that they only give the new kill team to the actual Deathwatch faction. It's I don't think it's as likely, but I think it's possible. But the other thing is, okay, maybe they're going to have something that makes up for it. I find it hard. I don't think that I would rather have anything other than a strong melee. The thing is, I can't envision them getting shooting that's as strong as 4 Thunderhammers is in melee. That's the
I'd be
key.
shocked.
Hey,
Yeah.
if they were able to take like 8 frag cannons, something like ridiculous, then yeah, sure, I would obviously take that. But if it's gonna be, they get a plasma gun, a melt gun, or something, maybe they get 1 heavy weapon. I don't think that would make up for it. So
I think
we'll see.
I think from the photos I've seen, it's like they now have access to plasma guns, and like the Gravis guy can take 1 of 3 heavy weapons, but there's like 1 per 5. So it's like you get, if it's box locked, which we don't know yet, it would be like 1 heavy weapon plus like 1 plasma gun.
Yeah, the other thing I'm worried about is just having to get new models or what I can scrabble together, because all the Deathwatch I'm using are my firstborn Marines from 4th edition.
I did see that on stream, yeah.
So I kind of cobbled together the hammers and shields from bits I had and stuff. So like all of that, I haven't had to actually get any new Deathwatch kits, which I have no problem. I do enjoy painting and modeling the stuff, but I also like being able to just use the stuff I've already had and used a bunch throughout my sort of Warhammer history. So it would be really unfortunate if they were to force us to take a Gravis or a Phobos or something like that would mess with it, and then at that point I would probably just have to get whole new models for it. So I hope I don't have to do that.
I suppose that remains to be seen. But I don't have too much else to ask. I feel like you said quite a lot about your list and your thought processes. Are you planning essentially to take a similar list to your next event then, based on the changes you were talking about, or are you planning to go back to more of the Horde style if Knights and stuff fall out?
I think I'm going to keep this list. I really liked how it played. I like having just all those threats from the 3 Deathwatch kill teams and Canis. There's an RTT, in not this weekend, but next weekend that some of my friends are going to, so I'll probably be going there. And then I think there's a GT at the start of October. That's kind of the big Michigan area GT that I'll be going to. The thing is, so far, I've really only gone to local events. I've never driven more than a few hours to one. So I don't really have my sights set on any of these bigger, more, whether national, if it's the U.S., or some of these international events. But we'll see. I'll say this: I think I will be sticking with Agents. I even if they're bad, I'll still stick by them. It's my favorite faction from a lore standpoint and just from a modeling standpoint. So through thick and thin, I'll be running them.
No, that's great. I think the positivity is a really nice thing to see because quite often I see people get shut down on like Reddit or whatever when they start talking about agents. They're like, no, it's not a real faction. It's like, yeah, just let people play it, man.
Exactly, exactly.
But yeah, I guess last few things. Would you like to shout out anyone, sort of say thanks to anyone local or anyone you want to talk about that you've chatted a lot in theory crafting?
I mean, I really just want to shout out the Discord in general. It's been a great place for just bouncing ideas off of people and getting support too, seeing what people are doing, what lists they're taking, knowing that there are other people out there running them, and even in creators like yourself, like I said before, it's really great to have people invested in the faction and supporting it despite all this sort of negativity out there, one way or another. So yeah, this I did feel like going into that final game, I felt like I had a lot of hopes and dreams on my shoulders, and it was a lot of pressure, but it was also a sort of inspiring. I think in that last game, like I said, I was kind of demoralized from the Knights' loss and thinking, well, I've already done what I could do, but I definitely felt like there were fans at home that I wanted to do my best for, and that was everyone in the Discord, in the community, and so I think this was I don't see this as really just my win. This is a win for the faction.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you found this interview style format interesting. It was very nice to have Matt on to just talk about his experience with Imperial Agents and his successes with the faction. As mentioned during the video, I'll put a link to the Imperial Agents Discord server as well as the normal link to my Discord server down below in the description. And then as always, please comment below what you thought about Matt's list, what he talked about during this video, and remember to like, comment, subscribe, all the standard YouTube pleasantries as it helps the channel grow, and share it with your friends. Show people that Imperial Agents, can place tops at tournaments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.